Good morning. My name is Lily Chang, and I'm the Secretary-Treasurer for the Canadian Labour Congress. I'm here this morning with Bea Bruske, President of the CLC, and Larry Rousseau, Executive Vice President. The Canadian Labour Congress is Canada's largest central labour organization. We are proud to represent over 3 million workers from every region of the country and every sector of the economy. And today we are here to talk about the priorities that are top of mind for workers across the country as we head into a new parliamentary session. Workers across Canada are drowning in the affordability crisis. Families are worried about the state of their healthcare system, and a growing number of communities are having to cope with the devastating impacts of climate change. In recent months, we've seen workers standing up and demanding better. They are turning to unions to support them in helping to fight for a better future, to have access to the care that they need when they need it, to protect and create good, low-carbon jobs, and to restore fairness for workers in collective bargaining. Canadians are still worried about the affordability crisis, and with good reason. This past year, we've seen companies making huge profits while workers' pay is falling further behind. A recent Bank of Canada survey showed that 2 of 3 Canadians are increasingly cutting back in spending or planning to do so because of their fear of high interest rates and inflation. And last week, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem held the interest rate at 5% for the 4th consecutive time, arguing that inflation is still too high, and he hasn't ruled out further rate increases if inflation continues. But Governor Macklem stubbornly refuses to acknowledge that the interest rates are a major part of what is driving the inflation problem. Workers and their families are struggling to keep up with skyrocketing cost of living and having to make impossible choices in household spending. I will now turn it over to Bea, who will provide further details on what workers are expecting from their government this year. Thank you.
Thank you. We are facing multiple crises stacked one on top of the other. We're facing an affordability crisis, a healthcare crisis, a climate crisis, and a workforce crisis in our care sectors. Workers are looking to levels of government to urgently provide tangible, real, long-term solutions. Let's start with healthcare. I have heard far too many horror stories in healthcare. We've heard of a colleague waiting for 10 hours to be seen, a neighbor's elderly father waiting for 20 hours to be seen after a fall at home. This is not okay. A year after the historic healthcare agreements, too little progress has been made. Every single day, we hear of patients being turned away because vital hospital services are closed. Everywhere, emergency rooms are overflowing, with some emergency rooms operating at 200% capacity. A recent report by the Ontario Health Coalition paints a very grim picture. There were 1,200 urgent care and emergency department closures in Ontario alone last year. Healthcare workers are absolutely exhausted, facing increasingly heavy workloads, deteriorating work conditions, and longer hours at work. In fact, we know that last year alone there were over 40,000 vacant nursing positions across Canada. We have been sounding this alarm for many years. We are facing a pan-Canadian healthcare crisis, and enough is enough. We need governments to urgently act and fix this crisis before it is too late. It is very disappointing to see that certain premiers are ignoring this critical situation and are failing to make progress on coordinated action that would better retain and recruit healthcare workers and strengthen our public healthcare system. Workers are looking for the government to act as families are falling further and further behind. And one way that governments can act to support families and to lift some out of economic pressure is by introducing a Pharmacare Act. We have waited long enough and the clock continues to tick. Canadians need a single-payer, universal public prescription drug plan that will provide coverage for all Canadians no matter what their income, their age, or where they live. We know that affording medication means that patients stay out of emergency rooms and they stay out of doctors' offices when they are able to actually afford the medicines that they need. I've heard very troubling and quite frankly disheartening stories from workers right across this country telling me that they are staying up at night trying to figure out how to pay the rent, put groceries on the table, and on top of it, buy the medications that their family needs. It's an impossible decision that no family should have to make. We know 1 in 5 Canadians can't afford their prescription drug coverage, and we know that 1 million Canadians tell us that they are cutting back on food or heating costs in order to actually afford the prescriptions that they need. And just over the last 2 years, we've seen food prices rise exponentially. For example, families are paying 20% more year over year in terms of their food budgets. They're paying 40% more for basic things like pasta and butter, 50% more for certain vegetables and fruits, and an average of 30% more for things like, shampoo, deodorant, things that they need in order to keep their families going. Workers are looking for government to alleviate the cost of living crisis that they are facing and to provide immediate relief from sky-high food prices. We have an idea for decision makers. Impose a windfall profit tax on these large food retailers and use those revenues to fund an extension of last year's grocery rebate. The one-time grocery rebate that was previously introduced was not only insufficient, it was inadequate. Workers need a long-term solution that will make sure that everyone gets the support that they need. What we are proposing with the windfall profit tax is to return those unearned profits from the big, giant grocery retail corporations back into the public bank account, where the money can be used to support families and to provide relief in the face of an affordability crisis. Now let's talk about Pierre Poilievre's plan and his approach on worker-focused legislation. We see it with Bill C-50, the Sustainable Jobs Act, and we see it with Bill C-58 with the anti-scab legislation. Before the winter break, the Conservative stance on sustainable jobs was nothing but shenanigans, wasting time and wasting public dollars in terms of this particular bill. What is preventing Poilievre from supporting Bill C-50? This is important legislation that will ensure that workers have a say in their future. Workers are worried about the future of their jobs and the future of their communities. It's about making sure that their voices are being heard. It's about them, workers, having a voice at the decision-making table. And let's be honest, if he was on the side of workers, as he claims to be, he would support this bill and he would stop blocking it. What workers are looking for is tripartite solutions here, levels of government, business, and unions coming together to find solutions as our economy transitions to net zero. Even though it's a new year, some things have not changed. We have yet to hear what Pierre Poilievre's position is on anti-scab legislation. We know that this legislation will help 1 million workers right across Canada. It's a simple question. Is he going to support the legislation or not? One thing is clear. Pierre Poilievre cannot be trusted to help struggling families or to stand up for workers. His track record speaks for itself. He is against holding big corporations accountable, and he voted against school lunch programs. When in power, the CPC slashed billions from healthcare, imposed austerity on working people, and introduced anti-labor laws. Instead of contributing to solutions, Poilievre is undermining workers and their unions. But make no mistake, Canada's unions won't stand for it. Workers have a clear message for parliamentarians this year. It's time to put people first.
Bonjour, Larry Rousseau, vice-président exécutif du Congrès du travail du Canada. Et un enjeu qui sera assurément sur tous les lèvres de toute la population canadienne cette année, c'est la crise du logement. Avec l'augmentation des loyers et les coûts hypothécaires dus à des taux d'intérêt élevés, il est de plus en plus difficile pour les travailleurs et leurs familles de trouver un endroit abordable pour s'y loger. La stratégie du Canada en matière du logement est encore insuffisante pour répondre à la demande actuelle et aux besoins anticipés liés à la croissance rapide de la population. Mais une chose est claire, ce n'est pas l'immigration qui est à l'origine de la crise du logement, mais bien sûr le sous-financement et les changements aux politiques de logement par les gouvernements fédéraux et provinciaux, et ce, depuis les années 90. Pour résoudre ce problème, nous avons besoin d'investissements publics dans le logement, comme nous l'avons fait après la guerre. On l'a déjà fait, on est capable de le faire encore. La construction de logements doit être considérée comme un investissement. Il ne suffit pas du tout de seulement stimuler les promoteurs privés. Nous devons nous assurer que les investissements publics profitent aux travailleurs et travailleuses qui luttent pour trouver un logement. Contrairement à ce que Pierre Poilievre veut nous faire croire, lorsque les gouvernements fournissent les investissement adéquat, lorsqu'il monte la voie avec l'argent public, le secteur privé va suivre et non l'inverse. When they were in government, the Conservatives slashed funding for housing, resulting in the loss of close to 800,000 affordable housing units. Think about that for a minute. 800,000. How would that help today with this crisis? Workers need their government to have greater ambition in their efforts to provide affordable, high-quality, and non-market housing for low-income, homeless, and precariously housed populations, including Indigenous Canadians, survivors of domestic violence, and people living with disabilities. Everyone benefits from people wanting to come to Canada, to contribute to our economy and to our culture. We should encourage and facilitate it, but that means ensuring that we have the infrastructure to support them. Tout le monde profite du fait que des personnes souhaitent s'installer ici, au Canada, comme je l'ai fait moi-même, et contribuer à notre économie et à notre culture. Nous devons encourager et faciliter cette démarche. Mais pour cela, il faut s'assurer que nous disposons de l'infrastructure nécessaire pour les soutenir. The government must allocate $20 billion a year in capital funding to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund to build a minimum of 100,000 new units each year. That's jobs. That's investing in the economy in conjunction with provincial partners and other public investments. We must accelerate the rollout of the National Housing Strategy's Federal Lands Initiative. Introduce a dedicated 5-year, $10 billion public land acquisition fund to acquire additional land for the construction of non-market affordable rental housing and assist the community housing sector to acquire existing affordable rental buildings by creating a $20 billion housing acquisition fund in order to maintain a supply of affordable housing for low and modest income households. And we can do this. Maintenant, je vais demander à Bea Bruske de revenir prendre des questions. I will ask Bea Bruske to take your questions now. Thank you.
I don't have any questions, so if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.